Hello and welcome to the Marketing Trail Guide podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Krusiewicz, founder of Marketing Trail Guide and fractional chief marketing officer for companies running on the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS. In this first season, Opportunities in Crisis, I'm talking with business leaders and entrepreneurs about how to survive and thrive in times of uncertainty. This is episode 11, Every Company is a Startup, with Quinn Taber. Quinn was born in France and spent his childhood traveling with his parents. And at the age of 15, he started a microfinance company investing in small companies in Africa and the Middle East. His newest venture, Immerse, connects students in Asia with American English teachers through virtual reality. We discuss his VR language learning technology, a COVID-induced pivot, and how even established companies need to innovate, test, measure, and iterate just like a startup. Without further delay, here's my interview with Quinn Taber. Quinn, thanks so much for being here. Welcome.
Absolutely. Hey, folks. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
You're welcome. Glad to have you with us. Quinn, you and I have gotten to know each other through just some different means, different groups, certainly the startup community in and around Irvine, California, among other things. And it's been cool to kind of see Immerse and see how your passion for different peoples and different language groups of the world. Maybe you could just kind of tell us about some of that background and how you got to Immerse. Give us some of the why behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. Definitely the through line for my upbringing was seeing these different cultures and seeing how much language was either a barrier or a bridge. And when folks were able to really communicate, that was such a key step to building relationship, whether it's peace building in hard parts of the globe or just fostering international business in places like East Asia. And from those experiences, I was both really compelled by the impact that could be had there, but then also how lucrative the market was becoming, particularly in places like China, Japan, Korea, the Arab Gulf. The English tutoring market was blowing up in just the time when I was overseas from like 2012 to 2016, 2017. It grew to a $60 billion market. This whole premise of connecting students in these locales with American teachers, particularly online. And that obviously is due to the surge of products like Skype and Zoom. But it became pretty oversaturated quickly. And it was hard for different companies to differentiate. So for myself and my co-founders, we saw it as a really interesting opportunity to disrupt using a lot of the pedagogy that we had learned just from learning different languages, that immersion is so key. Actually traveling to that context is really crucial for the learning and the retention. Right. And Skype begins to do that, but not nearly the same extent that traveling or studying abroad does. Sure. So we built the first VR platform that connects teacher and student in an immersive context. Because English teaching is by far the biggest market amongst the different languages. All of our students are particularly in East Asia, and they get to put on their VR goggle and feel like they're in a virtual Disneyland or a virtual Hollywood or Times Square or Silicon Valley office, which they geek out on. It's really fun, but also the learning is much, much more effective.
And I think we've all experienced the frustration of using a Rosetta Stone and then not really having much to show for it. And so it sounds like you're convinced that, the immersive method, which, if you look at your namesake here, right, it's core to how you mentioned the pedagogy, the learning mechanism and methods that you're using to actually help people learn the language.
Yeah, exactly. So on my end, I kind of, probably like you, Kevin, I had a lot of like firsthand experiences where I would have taken Spanish in high school and I'd find a way to squeeze by with an A, but then I'd go down to Tijuana for a surf trip and I couldn't pull together a single sentence. It was like kind of shameful actually. And then once I spent some more time overseas, I saw how much my own brain almost subconsciously was picking up the language way quicker than I had in the traditional classroom. So that caused me to say, all right, this is my experience. It's the experience of my peers in these different countries. there's got to be a science to it. And sure enough, a lot of the top linguists, like the researchers at their ivory tower university research centers, they completely agree.
Mm-hmm.
The science of just how the mind learns language is much less around like rote memorization, which is
Right.
what our schools do. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised, and to do that in an immersive context is like sometimes up to 3 times more efficient than just staring at a whiteboard with your teacher.
Right. So we've got these schools that are dual immersion, right? And so I would guess, and I haven't asked you about this prior to this, but I guess you kind of buy into that concept. Yeah. So, and to the extent that your company name is Immerse, and so now what the experience is like, and it seems like it all comes down to the experience. It's not just the content itself. And you mentioned, kind of like rote memorization, but the experience in which that content is learned is just as important, maybe even more important than the content itself.
Yeah. Yes. You totally got it. It's an interesting one that when it comes to the like efficiency of how our human mind memorizes, the more we call them like language anchors, the more connections you have with a new term or a new grammar concept. If just you only have one connection, being a flashcard, where it's this visual connection, there's a good chance you'll remember it for a day or two, but by day 5, it's gone. But if you can do the visual, the oratory, the like kinesthetic, if you're learning the word for table or apple, the difference between just seeing that in Arabic or me picking up an apple and saying tifa and putting it in your hand virtually, and you taking a virtual bite out of it, that will take your attention from 2 days to like 2 months, just because you have all of these different connections.
Yeah. So there's a synergy going on between all of those input points, and then probably the reinforcement of using it over time, which is why immersion is so successful. And yeah, I love, I know a little bit about the back end, but you've spent some time in some refugee camps. You spent some time doing international relief. Maybe you could even tell us about some of those stories that got you super excited about the why behind it.
Oh, I love that question. Yeah. So I planned on getting into business long term out of school. So I studied econ and then minored in finance. But it was basically when I graduated from my undergrad, it was within a couple months of right when the Syrian refugee crisis was really like taking over the headlines in the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So that for me was just a must. I was like, oh, I've got to do it. Like this is the crisis of my generation. Right. I can't take this JP Morgan job that I just got offered when I know what's going on in different parts of the globe. So I went out. A big part of my language learning journey, but also just personally, a lot of my like calling and excitement was I started off living in the nice like West Side American part of Beirut in Lebanon, and just hung out with Americans, and it was super easy. And then I felt kind of convicted. I'm like, that's not why I came here. So I moved into the refugee slum. I lived with 5 refugees, only one of which spoke English. And guess what that did? For one, I learned so much about the culture, so much about the crisis in a much more first person like vantage point. But then my actual Arabic conversational skills took off because I'm watching the soap operas with them. I'm smoking hookah and playing soccer. And sure enough, the actual core language mechanisms really started to grow exponentially and so much faster than my American buddies that were in the nice part of town. And it was so compelling. This is kind of what I touched on. The idea of like, for my buddies now, these Syrian guys, they so badly wanted to get jobs. They so badly wanted to go back to school. They so badly, if possible, wanted to like head west towards Europe. But language was the barrier. So until they could actually pass these key tests, it was impossible. So that's a big part of our desire as a company, is to have a philanthropic element to what we do. So we're going to make most of our money in China and Japan, but the hope is then to also give back by providing this really top tier educational experience for the least of these people, like the refugee that's trying to emigrate or get into a four-year university.
So you talked about earlier a bridge, that language can be a bridge. The history is littered with cultures finding that their differences are more compelling than their similarities, and sometimes it's through a significant value difference. Sometimes it's through misunderstanding, I think this happens in our interpersonal relationships, where when we learn to listen, when we learn to speak, when we learn to check our assumptions, check our expectations, we become aware of how we operate in that relationship, is when we have a chance at that relationship beginning to flourish. And language is certainly a part of that. In your experience in learning Arabic firsthand, not in some, context divorced from the culture, but in the culture, did you find that your perspective on, let's say, Syrians or Middle Easterns or Jordanians or something like that, or Lebanese people, or did your perspective change at all in terms of after you learned the language and began to understand more, in terms of your perspective on the world or people groups or cultures?
That's brilliant. You're touching on a really interesting academic subject in linguistics, but also anthropology and sociology, that like language is in it of itself a container of cultural values. Mm-hmm. So it's so interesting to me that in English, we've got like one word for love, one word for friend. Like, it's pretty simple. There isn't much like elegance or variety to it.
Sort of monochromatic in a way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In the Middle Eastern culture, I'm like, probably one of the first things I learned was how to go about just greeting someone in Middle Eastern culture. And you might get this if you have like a neighbor that's Iranian or Lebanese. Sure. They're super warm. They're going to bring food over, and you might have that understanding. But when you get into the language of it, greetings, even just if you're passing someone on the street, like on your way, I'm going to the grocery store, he's coming back, we pass by, it's a 3-minute process. I'm saying, hello, health to you and your family. May God's blessing reign over you. How are your children? Like, it's like an 8-step thing.
It's not a transaction. It's not.
It's like poetry.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like it took me weeks just to memorize all the little like ins and outs of it. But once you do understand it, it's beautiful. Like that carries so much meaning and like relational credibility that's built, and trust that in the West I've never even perceived. And there's 100 other examples, but that's the one that comes to mind first for me.
So, I don't want to get too geopolitical here, but I think, the connections are clear, right? If we're going to be in a relationship with wife, husband, child, neighbor, neighbor to the north, neighbor to the south, to the east, to the west. One, table stakes is we've got to understand. We've got to understand one another. We've got to understand ourselves. We've got to understand that juxtaposition, that give and take are like, wow. For me, growing up in South Orange County, never viewed greetings that way. In fact, if a greeting takes longer than about 5 seconds, I'm just like, didn't really mean to get into things. I just was saying.
When I said, how are you? I didn't really quite intend to launch this whole.
So that must have been quite a shift for you, even like, okay, what even is this category? What even is this thing of, did that change your perspective on interpersonal communication or on nations and cultures dealing with one another, even in a, peacetime, wartime, whatever it is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's given me an enhanced, frankly, understanding of how different cultures are, because a lot of times here in the West, we have such a cultural like position of power and influence that
Mm,
everyone has to conform to our standards.
mm.
But to actually spend time over there and understand both the incredible benefits that other cultures maintain that we don't, and then also some of the drawbacks. And then in an increasingly globalized world where global trade is so interconnected,
Yeah.
and like our economy obviously affects everyone else's, but will also be affected when negotiations with China fall apart
Yeah,
or
you
things
think?
in the EU
Just a
shake
little
up.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like there's massive stakes at play here.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got 100 different examples, but just how I now am able to watch a like an online, it's kind of boring, but these like C-SPAN meetings between like a US ambassador and a Middle Eastern ambassador, and the US guy walks up and says, "Hi, how are you?" Sits down and starts talking. I'm like, you just missed the greeting. Like, you're off to a bad start, man. you're
Wow.
you're like down.
So the interpreter's not enough. Like what I hear you saying is the kind of one level, one synapse interaction. It's so myopic almost, right? It's just not enough. It's anemic. I was going to bring up this whole thing about the globalization of business, but on my previous guest was a guy that spends his time producing videos and movies, mainly for nonprofits. In fact, you may know Jeremy Gant, 110 Pictures. Yeah, so we just had Jeremy Gant on earlier, and so we were talking about that people do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. Know, like, and trust. And one of the emphases was with people. Like, we don't do business with corporations. We don't do business with the machines. And increasingly so, especially in sort of our humanity-starved place we find ourselves here in this COVID scenario, we really have to build that bridge of trust. And the corporations that do the best in terms of building that trust and keeping that trust with their customer base are doing so on a human level, and are doing so from a deep understanding of the other. And so I just think there's so many wonderful implications for the understanding of language, but not just language. Like, I can get an interpreter, I can get an app, I can get Google Translate to translate the words, but there's so much more to it than that. I learned some of this when I was learning biblical Greek in college, where, you translate a language and there's a wooden translation and then there's a dynamic equivalent, and it's sort of on a spectrum, right? And the wooden translation sometimes just seems so empty because it's missing the cultural idioms. It's missing the feeling, the soul of it. And, you can get a lot of that from that more of a dynamic equivalent. But I was just thinking, what does it mean that most Americans only speak one language? What does that mean for us?
It's a huge missed opportunity. Um, and I want to squeeze this one thought in that I've been reflecting on the last day or two that kind of touches on this exact piece. I Of the industries in my world that are getting hit really hard, language training, definitely. Like translation, there's all these implications here, but the one that's fascinating is the study abroad market. In the US, we're aware that, all right, maybe our kids or our friends' kids are going to spend a semester in France. And then also, I know that at the local community college, there's a number of students from East Asia or maybe the Middle East. But it turns out that market, that's a $40 billion a year market, just student exchange. And guess when it started and who it was started by?
Mm,
The late 1940s, by US politicians that said never again.
mm,
In order for us to curb this nationalism, but then from nationalism, like hostility towards the other,
mhm,
we need our young people cross-pollinating, spending a lot of time together.
mm.
And yes, things like COVID will have a really, really dramatic set of economic repercussions. $40 billion market that came to a screeching halt in 2 weeks.
Wow.
But also, there's all of these societal implications that now a lot of the politicians that are on the board for the major study abroad agencies that have been around since the 40s, they're all terrified of the implications that, all right, relations with China have been deteriorating. And now this new generation that was supposed to come and study abroad with each other,
Right.
now that window is being closed.
Wow.
So once they're in positions of power, they don't understand the other
Right.
in quite the way that their predecessor did.
Right.
That's going to have all of these cataclysmic
Yep.
repercussions. So for us, I'm like, we got to double down. Oh
Yeah.
man, like there's a whole nother set of societal costs that will be incurred if we aren't, as entrepreneurs, thinking really creatively and working really hard right now.
Wow. I mean, I could have taken that and replaced it with nonprofit almost because the way you're talking about your business is so missional. And I think that, you know, even that there's a false dichotomy in my statement, even of that corporations have a responsibility and, you know, we call it CSR or corporate social responsibility or whatever you want to call it. But hanging around you for long enough, hanging around groups like, you know, Believers in Tech or some other groups, there's a strong belief that we have a responsibility as corporations to do good. And the scenario that I heard you describe is this retrenching, this atomistic cultural phenomenon that's happening that is responding to negativity, that's responding to hostilities, and it's you know, I don't want to get too political here, but it's the opposite of globalization. It's this retrenchment, right? Where it's nationalistic and it's us versus them, and you know we've seen in history where that's led us. I want to get into your business and some of your thinking and decision making in a minute. We're going to take a break, and then we'll be right back and do that.
From a very young age, I remember in 6th grade being taught in sex education that an abortion is just a woman's choice, and that's it. That's the only thing they teach you. It's not a baby. It's part of the woman's body, and she gets to decide whether it lives or dies. I grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, in a very Catholic and supportive family.
My husband and I, Jerry, have 5 children. Veronica is the youngest. And I always told her, I know God has great plans for you. I had always told her that. In high school and even junior high, she had lots of struggles with anxiety and depression and problems in school.
I would just not want to get out of bed. I had no motivation to do schoolwork or be around family or friends. I kind of secluded myself in my room. It was Christmas Day of 2018. I was 16 years old. My boyfriend was 18 at the time. We had been dating for about 4 months. I felt that something was off with me, so I looked up some symptoms online and it was matching up with pregnancy. I went to the store to get the pregnancy tests, went home, I took one, and almost immediately the second line came up, which means that you're pregnant. I was just in disbelief at first. I was like, no way, I'm not pregnant, not me. A couple hours later, I took another one and also was positive. I have a very close relationship with my mother, so I decided to tell her first. I went up to her and I showed her the tests, and she had already had a feeling that I was pregnant because I was acting differently than I usually do.
I was a little bit shocked, but I knew that I would support her. You definitely have always been pro-life, and I knew without a doubt I would never want Veronica to have an abortion.
My boyfriend told me he wanted me to have an abortion. His first reaction was just that he was very afraid. I understood where he was coming from because I was afraid as well. I knew that he wanted me to have an abortion, and I felt pressured to do so just because I didn't want to ruin his life or alter his life in a big way when it's not something that he wanted. I actually went down to Planned Parenthood. I was put in a room with this woman, and instead of her talking to me about my options or resources or different ways I could get help, it felt like she was a salesperson and she was trying to sell me on abortion. That just didn't sit right with me, and I knew that that wasn't the place I needed to be, and that's when I went home and did my own research. I searched on YouTube, what is an abortion? And I came across live actions video where the doctor describes in detail at each stage of pregnancy how the baby is killed. I just felt so upset and sad after I saw that video. I just cried. I knew if I hadn't found that video, that might have been my son who was being described in the abortion procedures, and I might have gone through with something without knowing what I was truly doing. I knew that he was a person, and that he was alive, and that killing him at any stage of life would be wrong.
The truth is powerful, and I'm so glad she came across that.
My boyfriend saw that video also, and it moved us both, and we knew that we couldn't do that. My baby was over 9 pounds, so I had to have a C-section. They brought me in, and it was about a 30-minute process. The moment I heard him cry, I was just like, I couldn't believe it, and I was so emotional because it felt like it was a blessing that he was there, and I could have almost taken his life away, and I was just so happy to hear his voice. That's a moment I'll never forget, and I just feel blessed to be his mom. I think a lot of women do choose abortion because they're afraid of the lack of support, and also I think they're just uneducated and not completely aware of what they're doing. Your pregnancy isn't just a blob of cells, it is a human being, and it deserves to live. Don't be afraid. There's so many resources out there that can help you if you are pregnant. I had my boyfriend there with me. He's been a great dad. He's really stepped up. I've been helped by people who I didn't even know existed. I'm really thankful that I found that video and that I found the resources I did and that I have my son. He really saved my life.
Well, my guest today is Quinn Taber from Immerse, and this is the Marketing Trail Guide podcast, Season 1, Opportunities in Crisis. And Quinn and I have been talking about the importance of language as it pertains to global concerns, as it pertains to economic and business concerns. And Quinn, you had a go-to-market strategy that was based on a pretty different reality. You're a startup. Earlier, we talked about how you've raised about $1 million and you're heading for a Series A right now. Startups have a runway, and you kind of weren't watching things like burn rate and, trying to get that product market fit before you run out of cash, and always also courting investors and trying to stay ahead of that. Right. And so, talk to us about your original, kind of go to market pre-COVID and now what?
Ooh, how much time do you have? I'll go quick. So the nature of being a VR company, when I talk to my fellow VR entrepreneurs, we all kind of laughingly hit ourselves up the head and say, I didn't know I signed up for a hardware industry, not a software industry. We're all on the content creation side. Folks like Sony and Facebook and HTC that are the hardware creators, but we still have to deal with a lot of the supply chain complexity because VR hasn't hit the mass adoption rate that everybody predicted in 2016 and 2017.
Right.
So if all that we were doing was providing English training to current VR headset owners, that would be a small total addressable market. So in order to prove to investors that this is a $1 billion market opportunity, which we very much believe and have the numbers to back it up, it will be, we need to provide the software, but also get the hardware in people's hands.
Right.
To send one headset to each student when maybe they're new to VR or they didn't get the free demo is difficult. So the model that we kind of optimized towards was selling what we call our VR classroom kit. It's 5 headsets with all the software already uploaded onto it, extra batteries, charging stations, everything. In this cool Pelican case that travels really well, shipping that to a Fortune 500 business office in Taipei or Tokyo or Seoul, or to a top prestigious university or high school or language school. And then each of those different entities take that kit, put it in a conference room, and then around the clock, we bring groups of 5 students in for their lessons. So in the case of Microsoft or PwC, stick that kit in a conference room, and 8 a.m., 5 students come in, take their 1-hour class. 9 a.m., the next 5 employees, English learners come in. That was a very optimal and like kind of the best like gross profit play that we could have executed on with all of those
working.
It was working, yeah. With all those locations closed now, it disappeared very quickly. So to be totally honest, we've had 2 quick pivots. One is a lot of those contracts were month to month, and our clients said, can we furlough this? Can we pick this back up once our offices reopen? We didn't have the contract to disagree. So we said, all right, yep, hopefully it'll be soon. So we started chasing down some large actual like agency software development work that we had been asked about in the past. And we had said, we're busy. We can't take it. Right. So we circled back and said, we're ready. Let's take the deal. Let's just keep our burn rate down by getting some extra money in. That's been really helpful. So we spun up 2 contracts quickly where we were able to bill hourly at a really healthy rate. And then the other one, which has demanded a lot of, frankly, like strategic thought, is asking the question, all right, we've got an amazing product. We've got a great team. Who needs us right now? Because our current customer base, frankly, they don't need us. We're a really cool, nice to have, but we aren't crucial.
Yeah.
Going back to the study abroad market that I mentioned earlier, they're at a place where some of them are predicting it could be 5 years before the study abroad market returns to like 2019 numbers.
Wow.
Right? Like they're seeing a long-term valley because of COVID-19. And in the case of 2020, all bookings were canceled. So these agents that operate as like glorified travel agents, they've got these companies with 20 people on their staff, 50 people, no income. So we started calling them up and saying, hey, y'all need something right now. Can we partner and you be our on the ground distributor, customer support help, translate our marketing collateral, put it out on your Facebook page. We'll give you a significant commission on every deal that comes in. And by you being kind of our partner, it'll help us expand in this time. It'll let us get our first B2C wheels turning without having to spend a ton on a big marketing agency and all this marketing spend. And on their end, it's their first prospect of revenue in 2020. So it's proved a really obvious and intuitive partnership. And of the like couple hundred agents that we just kind of started cold calling, we already have almost 30 that have signed and said they want to be this like formal partner moving forward.
And are they using that model like in the institutions where they've got 5 sets of hardware and they're pulling people in, or how is the consumer consuming it?
Yeah, good question. So I have gotten to know a lot of different markets because we've got partners and staff in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, West Europe, East Europe, all these different places. All of them are suffering equally, and there's zero opportunity for us to do group classes where students are together. So these agents are all basically like translating, creating everything, and sending individual headsets to individual students. Yeah.
And are they, I mean, so I don't know what the price point is, but VR even here is not inexpensive. I don't know what does a headset cost here?
About $200.
Okay. Actually, that's a lot less than I expected. I guess the price has come down. And so these students out there in the various parts of the world that are finding out about you through these distance learning or study abroad programs, they're just being shipped a VR device and they're buying that device, or I'm just like, is that a hardware as a service model through these providers, or what does that even look like?
So they pay, it's interesting. All of these students are used to like 3 elements to any pricing package. There's the registration fee, there's the course fee, and then there's the supplies fee. So typically a supply fee for them is $100 for a textbook. Now it's $200, but you get a cool VR headset. You can also like play video games on and watch Netflix in. So they don't stress that bump too much. And then our course fee and registration fee are frankly pretty close to on par with our like traditional classroom competitors.
Mhm.
In some cases were like 10-15% more, but it's pretty darn reasonable.
Yeah. So in previous episodes, and you probably heard this analogy, as a surfer, you paddle to where the break is. And so the break moved.
Oh, yes.
They put a jetty out, and Killer Dana is now just a still harbor, right? And so, and sorry for the inside joke for anybody that's not in Orange County, but look up Killer Dana, and look up Killer Dana, and you'll see what I mean. So now the break's somewhere else, and you're paddling, you're moving somewhere else, and I guess that's just a perpetual thing, right? I mean, that's the job of a startup, to find product market fit. But you were having some fun on the break, you were catching some waves, but then all of a sudden everything changed, and now you're moving.
Yeah, it is the most like significant element to my job description as I've come to perceive it, even of late. I always knew that I jokingly, when I'm with friends, I call myself like a military like tactician. Like I am really methodically mapping out, all right, where are the competitors? Where's the opportunity? How are we going to strike? Like it isn't this soft, easygoing process. I'm like, we're at war.
Yeah.
We need to bring our A game. And that's what it's felt like of late, that I've really had to, almost in this military analogy, like get the troops united around a new vision that feels pretty different than the one I was preaching a month ago.
Yeah.
Give some clarity in how we're going to achieve it, and then lead with a lot of confidence, even if maybe in my insides I'm not 100% confident.
Yeah.
But we're going to run hard in this direction and make the best of it.
So, let's talk about mindset for a minute. As a leader, it's really hard to make that pivot yourself. I think maybe more for others, some than others. But when did you realize, okay, I better paddle somewhere else and do it now? And like, what was that process for you so that you could be like, hey guys, we want to be over there? Like, but that had to start here. It had to start here. It had to start with you accepting probably what was happening, right? Versus like, no, I don't want it to be this way, so I'm just going to hang out here,
Oh, totally. Yeah. So we had some interesting insights as a team that I brought our entire leadership team to Japan for 2 weeks at the end of February. So we're talking, I'm getting DMs from my grandma, from my old high school buddies. They're like, why are you in Japan right now? Are you reading the news? But we had the trip on the books, and we were going to speak at this big conference. So we saw the reality of COVID-19 before most of our peers.
Got it.
Before it really became a relevant issue in the U.S.
Right.
So we had a little bit of forewarning. We saw that the schools were going to close. We saw that there was going to be a pretty protracted economic recovery. Like this isn't going to be a 2 months and we're back. Like we're talking minimum 8-12 months.
Yep.
Minimum. But even then, we still spent 3-4 weeks repeatedly calling our current customer base, trying to offer them a new solution, a discount. We got to the point of almost groveling, where it's like, all right, we're starting to beg for handouts from this customer base.
Yeah.
Or this whole time we've been positioning ourselves as this top-end luxury product. Like, how much more can we cut?
Right.
And that became enough is enough. If our current way of doing things isn't going to return, even if we made the decision, like, all right, how long do we think COVID will need to last for it to demand us to do a pivot? And we said, even if this thing's 3 months, are we just going to sit on our hands for 3 months? No. So that for us as a team was a wake up moment of this is back in March. Everyone's predicting June or July. Like, all right, it's game time. It's time to move.
And so you accepted that reality at some point, and maybe that was progressive, maybe it wasn't overnight, but at some point you said, okay, this is our new reality. Now I've got to lead people in that new reality. Was that a pretty quick, once you'd accepted that, was it pretty quick? Okay, like this is where we need to go. And then like, it's now harder than it used to be, right? Cause we haven't been optimized for this. So like, where's your head at? And how are you coaching yourself? Who's speaking into that for you? You know, even getting into some of your daily, weekly mindset disciplines to kind of keep your mind, your head, your heart in the right place.
Ooh, there's a lot there. I didn't know until starting Immerse how important, frankly, like my emotional health was to the company. I'm a optimistic guy. I'm a pretty confident guy most of the time, but when these obstacles hit, I would get struck by anxiety and disappointment and self-doubt more than like, oh, I was always the cool guy. Like I was the guy that things worked in high school and college and career. Like I didn't really have many push comes to shove moments where I was challenged in my identity. So I would say perhaps the best investment of my time on a week-to-week basis, especially lately, is waking up early, journaling. I'll meditate, I'll pray, I'll reflect. A big one for me lately has just been gratitude, and like really taking time to like be aware of all of the different things to be thankful for. And then like that's normally 2/3 of my like daily ritual, just to get my head on straight. And then the other half, see if I'm able to verbalize this well, but it's been me leaning into my responsibility as a general of a very small army. There's like less than 10 of us right now that are full time, and then a ton of teachers and everybody else. But like my role as general, I'm like, all right, this is a learning experience. I'm still young. Each of these little battle wounds will become something that will make me so much stronger for the next company, the next career opportunity. So I'm going to own this, and I'm going to lean in. I'm going to stay really smart, really analytical. And even if the whole thing sinks, there's still a lot of blessing in the midst of it. And keeping that mentality on straight has been crucial. When I don't do that, it takes a day or two for me to start disintegrating. So it's mandatory activity.
Yep. For me, I deal with the temptation to be on all the time. And I've found that I really need a weekend. And then the second half of my weekend is really all about getting my head in the game. So right around noon, sometimes not even until 4, but generally the better part of Sunday evening for me is assessing last week, what went well, what didn't go well, on multiple levels. So everything from strategic to tactical to where my head was at. Am I pursuing did I pursue the things that I want to pursue? Not only in the business, but for my family, for the broader meta things in my life. And then really being intentional about planning out what needs to happen this coming week and time blocking my schedule. So I got through about half of this. This is being recorded on a Monday, so Sunday was my day of prep. I got through about half of this and got right into Monday morning today and already feeling like my week is a little bit out of control because I haven't time blocked out the whole week. So for me, I don't know if I'm just extra neurotic, but I'm hearing a lot of this kind of discipline in a lot of business owners where the need to perform at a high level starts here. It starts here. And if you don't get that part right, you got to carve out time for it. If you don't get that part right, it's a snowball for the rest of the week.
I completely agree. I hate to admit it, and I we'll pretend it isn't the case amongst investors and teammates, but I'll have an entire week where it's like, man, my head isn't on straight. That week was a wash. That is so disappointing. And it really was, because I didn't start well. I didn't visualize the key priorities. I didn't time block, like you said. An interesting one. I'm curious how this might be similar for you. This is an aside, I've been loving The Last Dance. It's a docuseries by Michael Jordan.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's killer. Could not more highly recommend
I don't
it.
have ESPN, but I wish I did for that reason.
I know. I'm on my third free trial right now. Don't tell them. But one of the things that I think they highlight, but it's so obvious, the reason MJ was MJ is he was so mentally strong and so good at motivating himself again and again and again. Because that guy climbed every mountain there was in sports fandom.
Right.
And still, season after season, would find a new thing to light that fire, get back to work, get back in the weight room. I'm like, that's a whole element for me that I don't spend enough time on, is like, how am I lighting the fire every Monday morning?
Right.
That I'm excited. I'm not dragging my feet. I'm like, oh, MJ had something figured out. I'm gonna try to emulate him.
Yeah, and that goes not only to his performance as, a point guard in an isolated sense, but the weight that he carried as the general of his team, right? And the way his optimism allowed them to win how they won. And I think it was against the Pistons that one season where they went to 7 games. I think it was like his second to last season. He knew it was going to be over, right? And so, just to be able to harness and recruit the enthusiasm of your team, that's a whole nother exercise that you've got to be on for. And being on, I think that goes to my point of, when you're on, it's, you're slaying dragons. It's tiring. Like you come back and you fall asleep in your cave, and you try to recuperate. But that recuperation time, call it Sabbath, call it whatever you want, is super important to rest. Let the thoughts, kind of trickle down in where they need to, and then go back into the next week with purpose, intention, vision. That's just been a super helpful practice for me. And by the way, I've interviewed close to a dozen people now on this podcast, and that's a consistent discipline among pretty much everybody I've talked to, or everybody I've asked that question of, is it's just a non-negotiable. And I think we know that at this point from all the books of, highly successful people and all the things we've read, but you really, when you live it, that it's true. So just going to kind of turn the corner here and kind of slide into home. Maybe we could talk, just to finish things off, about where you're having the most fun. And then, kind of any advice that you would give other business owners that are facing what we're all facing, and how to sort of have perspective on it and balance it all.
Yeah, love both those questions. On the fun side of things, I finally put 2 and 2 together and realized that I was never really putting my cell phone down and never really clocking out, because I'm working from home for the first time.
Right.
And I did not have that habit dialed initially, and I wasn't self-reflective enough to acknowledge it. And it was messing up all of my rhythms. And then I finally pinpointed it and said, all right, if I'm going to tune back in from 8 to 9:30 p.m., that's all right, as long as it's planned and it's blocked out. But from 5 to 7, I'm going to be with my wife for an exercise. We're going to jump in the ocean or something.
Yeah. That
has been crucial. And I've had to be legalistic with myself of like, nope, can't take that last call. Got to clock out.
Yep.
So I'm like, could not recommend that more for folks that are in my shoes of going from having a really clean cut office space and a really safe and easy home environment. It's like, no, okay, those lines aren't as easy as they were. And even maybe the one other sentence for me has been, even for the fun times, not requiring them to be productive. Mm-hmm. So that's a total temptation for me. It's like, all right, yeah, let's have fun by like reading next to each other. I'm like, nope, go for a bike ride. Just get out for a second. Yeah, that's been really important and really helped with my own headspace. And then I think my final encouragement, there's so many things that um, come to mind, but I think the the corner that I've turned for myself has been in each great hero's journey, whether they're fiction or in history, because I love reading about those key politicians, those key generals. They had to slay some terrifying dragons against some really tough odds.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the litmus test. That's why you've got a George Washington
Right.
or a General Patton or you name it. And for me, I'm like, okay, I gotta own that. This is not a reason to just slink into this like anxious malaise. Like, oh, this is where I get to kind of prove my chops.
Mm-hmm.
And to know that like COVID-19 will go down in the record books is a pretty tough dragon for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
But it's also going to be a proving ground for a lot of folks. And I think just for my own leadership, my own confidence will be a major turning point that I'll cite the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to own that right now has been really crucial. I'd encourage others to go through that mental process.
So I have one more question actually based on that. So when you slay dragons, talk about the role of community in helping you do that.
Yeah, brilliant. Again, great question.
Because you're not doing this alone, right? You have advisors, you have coaches, you have
Totally
all kinds of help. Talk about that.
Yeah, I've got like 3 key buckets. I've got my like key investors and board members who they don't have a ton of like domain experience in VR education,
Sure.
but they're amazing leaders and amazing men of character. They've been key for speaking into a lot of just these character traits that I'm like looking to develop and build into. And they've been able to give some really amazing, like just tactile examples of when they've had to slay their dragons. I've been looking to get better about not being the like eternal optimist CEO that's just like slapping people and saying like, we're happy, this is fun, there's no such thing as a bad day, but actually telling the team like, this is scary, just lost a big contract, here are the implications, here's how we're going to rally, here's how we're going to work together, and actually letting them in. That's been a new thing for me. And then my advisors who do the ones with the like true domain experience, they've been really helpful on actually crafting our roadmap, right? So it's like, I've got the investors that have helped craft my internal roadmap. I've got my advisors that have helped map out what we're going to do in the next 6 months. And then I've got my team that we're going to pick up that boulder and get it to the top of the mountain.
Awesome. Quinn, I think our conversation is going to be resourceful for so many entrepreneurs, business owners, whether they're startup, later stage, what have you, because we're talking about things that are, transcendent above the circumstantial things. They're things that are common to us as humans. We've talked about the need to bridge the gap of distance between people groups, the need to do business with people we know, like, and trust. And with that reality, like, how do we do that in a global economy? It has to include bridging the language gap. And I can definitely see how Immerse is part of that solution to bridge that gap. And I definitely sense your heart in wanting to do that from your firsthand experience. And then just, as a leader, as a CEO, as somebody who has a goal, has a mission, but is also bringing other people along with you, and they're there to help in that mission. What are the challenges, and how do you get on the other side of those? How do you paddle to where there's opportunity, and then keep yourself healthy so that you can stand up on the board, and And so I just really appreciate your perspective and have a feeling we can, probably go a lot longer. But I think we're out of time. And man, I just wish you all the best in your micro pivots and testing those, and that you're able to grab some traction in the midst of all of this interesting circumstances we find ourselves in.
Yeah, it's a treat. I really appreciate you. Love everything that you're doing. You've been a big friend and encouragement to Immerse. So thanks for all that you do, Kevin. It really means a lot.
Thanks, Quinn. Appreciate it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Marketing Trail Guide podcast. Next time, we'll chat with Jorge Pacheco from Culture Connect about the state of the restaurant industry and something many of us overlook when it comes to our websites, ADA compliance. If you found this episode valuable, please give us a 5-star review and hit the subscribe button for more on how to find and benefit from opportunities in crisis. You can find the notes for this week's episode, plus all of our existing episodes and much more content at marketingtrailguide.com.